Hi, everyone, and welcome to the special simulcast, the Neil Haley Show and celebrity interviews live from the grotto without Greg Hanna. Greg's not here today, but he'll have that final question I'll ask for him. And my guest today is celebrity Nathan Gamble, and he's going to talk about the new comedy Bad Counselors. But Nathan has an unbelievable kind of story in his career in acting. Nathan, thanks for stopping by. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me here.
I see the titles you were in. But as we know, you were a child actor. So that
Yes.
process and that journey, but it must have been unbelievable, that story. So talk about that. And then I want to find how that faith journey, if it was always there, even when you were in Hollywood, such an early age.
Yeah, to make a super long story short, I like to see like my career was kind of like the reverse classic actor's journey, right? Because usually you toil, you take the classes, you're waiting tables for a little bit, you audition, and then eventually you get the big break. For me, I'm not in any way saying this as like a braggadocious way, but this is just how it is. Like my second audition, I booked, and it was for a movie called Babel, where I played Brad Pitt's son. And that movie was nominated for Best Picture. That was my second audition. And
How
then
old were you?
I was 7 years old. I had a bodyguard in Tijuana, Mexico. We were like true fish out of water. Like we were like, what is going on?
That's got to be crazy. What'd you think of
Yes.
Brad, working with Brad?
It's funny. With Babel, it takes place four different stories, kind of interwoven together in Japan, Morocco, and a couple Morocco, and then one in Mexico. I was the Mexico storyline, so he was my dad in it. But we only had like phone calls that were like pre-recorded for the scenes. But I did meet him at the Toronto Film Festival. He like went out of his way to like shake my hand, and it was a very nice guy. My mom was really excited about it for some reason. I don't know.
7 years old,
Yeah,
co-starring with being a part of it with Brad Pitt. I
yeah.
can't even imagine. See, that's the hard thing as a child actor. When you lead, you go ahead and have this huge win at 7 when you have no understanding of booking something like this,
Yes,
and then saying, I got to continue this. That's the pressure. You don't know it.
exactly.
Your parents are pressured, maybe, in that process, but they never thought of this. So, I mean, I'll tell you the example is interviewing celebrities, Nathan. I'm one of the top celebrity podcasts in the world, according to FeedSpot and a million podcasts. And I constantly try to step on my game with celebrities. And now my agency's got so busy, I've forgotten what led me to kind of that brand, even though I was a former professional wrestler too. I don't know if you know that story too, Nathan.
Wow, no
That, yeah.
way.
Okay. So basically, going through those two things, I'm like, man, I just interviewed this celebrity. And there's this down, this like, oh my gosh, I hit this, and that euphoric moment's over. How am I going to top that? It's 7. You don't think about those things, do you?
No, not really. And especially too, when you're working pretty consistently, like I was, like right after that, I booked a movie called The Mist, which was directed by Frank Darabont, who did Shawshank and The Green Mile. It was a Stephen King movie, and I was one of the main characters in it. And then we did Marley and Me, and then The Dark Knight, and then Dolphin Tale 1 and 2. And like I said, it was kind of the reverse story. And then all of a sudden, you hear all these things like, man, your career's just gonna go boom. It's just gonna continue to rise, and this industry is very fickle. Then after that, it was kind of a lull. I had done some TV stuff and a couple, indie films here and there, but at 19, I was living by myself in LA. I was miserable. I didn't have a faith. My parents did. I was I was so isolated that I was willing to end it all. And through
Oh no.
a
So,
series of phone calls, this guy who was the dean of a Bible college called me up and said, "Hey, I don't know. I know you don't know me, and I don't know you, but I think you should come and attend our college." And I was like, "Who is this guy?" No, thanks though. However, after time progressed and I started to hang out with some of these Bible college students because he's like, all right, just come out and visit us. Because it was in Ventura, California. So I drove out there and these guys they just had a countenance about them that I'd never seen before. They were joyous, they had peace, they had love. And I had never experienced experienced that. I mean, I was really fascinated because my whole ego, my whole reputation was in me being an actor, right?
Right.
And yet I was so unhappy, and yet all these broke college students have nothing, in my opinion, going for them, and yet they have so
Yeah,
much
so
peace.
I felt that in a way too because I was young in professional wrestling. I walked away at 29, went back to school to get my undergrad and then and graduate degrees. So I basically did almost similar to you in a way where
Wow,
I'm used to being on stage, even though it was minor leagues. I made it to the pinnacle a couple times,
that's awesome.
overseas, but I felt not fulfilled at all either. So
Mm-hmm.
I felt that emptiness inside as well.
Yes.
I felt that no one around me was my friend, and that's the problem in acting in certain ways. And then we could talk about how you've transitioned to more Christian-based films and how that's
Yeah.
changed a lot of those relationships that you started. And really, as a child actor, you just don't know what you're going to do. So, like, basically, you booked all these things and you thought you were going to be the next big thing. And what happened? Why? I want to get to the faith, but I'm missing this part of the piece of the story that got you this rock bottom moment in 17. Like, and I'm telling you, this is the biggest thing. When people achieve high success, I was talking to a guy yesterday who was one of the top college players that I'm considered to play, and then alcoholism killed him off. And then he played in the Arena Football League, same deal. Then now he's in acting. Then he finally gave up alcohol and his faith, and he totally transformed himself. But we talk about these high achiever. When you're a high achiever in something, ultimately there's going to be a letdown at one point in time, and you can't be on top forever. And a lot of people deal with that. So what were you dealing with?
The parameters and that's a great way to put it is when I was on set for most of my childhood career, I didn't just want to be a good actor. I wanted to be the best actor on set. I wanted to be the most professional. I wanted to know every single name on the crew and the cast. Like I made it my everything.
Right.
I ate, breathed, and slept on all things acting. Like it was my thing. So, but my identity was in it. And what I mean by that is I was Nathan the actor. So if
Yeah.
I had a season of not acting, I was now Nathan the failed actor because everything was poured into my career.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the isolation started, the spiraling started, the start to second guess my even abilities and I start to realize like, wow, what if I never act again?
Why do you think you didn't book stuff? Tell us this why after your child actors are very difficult to get them into the next level.
It's funny because I at that time I was booking quite a lot actually. I was just doing like TV show like guest stars or like I said a couple indie films, but I wasn't doing the things like the ones in theaters. I wasn't doing the
If you
parameters for
ever had a crystal
success.
ball and knew that not many would be in theaters later, you would
I
have either
know,
tried
exactly.
changed your mind.
Like Bad Counselors, which will be in theaters in
Yeah.
24 hours, is my first theatrical in 12 years. And that's
Oh my
bonkers.
goodness.
But at that
And then
time,
yeah,
yeah,
and I'm trying to paint this story and I'm like, this is where you're coming out of the woodwork. When I see your what you've booked,
yeah.
child actor, you did those things. You hit rock bottom. You found your faith going back to college, right?
Yeah, I didn't really have one, but I knew I needed something. I knew I needed some centering of my goals in life because if I never acted again, that would have been devastating to me at that time. Now, I go to this Bible college. My manager has a field day. She's like, "What are you talking about? You can't leave this industry for a little bit." And I said, "Bev, I have to go. I have to go. I have to figure out what these guys have. The juju that's on them. I want to know what's going on." So I get saved two weeks into the program, and I get pretty zealous where I'm like, I don't want to go to Hollywood. It's Sodom and Gomorrah, blah blah blah
Oh
blah
my
blah.
goodness. Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
classic pendulum swings one way, and then as I mature my faith, it swings back the other way, and I go, man, those people they need this kind of joy that I had, this kind of peace, this kind of centering where my identity's not in myself, it's in Him, it's in Christ. So I don't need to work to feel fulfilled. All the
Right.
fulfillment has already been done, and the no pressure is really on me. What I could be waiting tables, or I could be. a litany of jobs when I was in Bible college. I
Right.
wrote for a local newspaper. I helped out a escape room. I did contract construction. I did drywall installation. I did landscaping. I did
Wow.
waitering for bar mitzvahs. I taught at the local school district for at 7 different schools. I did a whole bunch of stuff not named acting, and I was okay with it. I was fulfilled. I loved doing it because my calling's not my career. My calling is just to tell the world about him.
Interesting. Okay. So you do all that. So how long are you out of acting for after
seven
graduating?
years.
Okay. So 7 years you were doing other things, but I look at my career in professional wrestling, how I used a lot of that, what I learned, and any of my jobs I've had to where I
Hmm.
am today.
Yeah, of
I take a
course.
lot of all that with me, all the experiences, regardless, like delivering newspapers at night, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
working for another company and
Yep.
taking all that to who I am as a person today.
Yes,
And
yes,
I
yes.
think that that's what you did is you formed, you saw I could do a lot of other things than act. And I think that you saw that you can enjoy what you're doing because you knew you were called to be on this earth. And
Yes.
that's the big thing when we have a calling, a passion, a purpose, there's no way of stopping us.
Yeah.
There's no way. And we're going to have some times that aren't going to be the best, but we're always going to be resilient to come back through. So, what
Agreed.
made you want to go back into acting? 7 years? Because again, there was a lot of probably pain you dealt with, probably a lot of being a child actor dealing with really who am I? What is my
Yes.
identity? What am I called? So 7 years later, you say, "Oh, I'm coming back to acting."
I think the 7 years were important because I use this example a lot because it's so true. It's getting out of Egypt, if you're an Israelite, wasn't the goal. It was getting the Egypt out of your heart. It was getting how they acted, how they did life like that. You should be set apart. You should do life differently. And for me, I had so much of my heart still wrapped up in the industry to the point where I'm like my ego and my identity was in it. So those 7 years was really kind of weaning out all of that stuff where it made me feel okay, if I never act again, I will be okay. And then
Yep.
7 years go by and I finally book another part. And it wasn't even, I wasn't seeking faith-based stuff. And I'm still not just seeking faith-based stuff.
I'm sure you're not because you
Obviously,
know you can make a difference and save people in so many ways that are not on
of
set. You can go
course.
into Hollywood, break into Hollywood, and show that. Look at people that are out there that yeah they mostly shoot Christian stuff because they have the opportunity, but they
Yeah.
also are out there in Hollywood being a disruptor.
Exactly. You got it exactly right. Like when we believe that the Great Commission is not just for fellow believers, when it's for everyone else, and you want to just love on them, like those are the sets that you really want to be on. And it just so happens that the last couple projects that I've gotten, one being Miracle on the Precipice, which is a Christian film, and then the next year I booked Bad Counselors, which is also a Christian film, coming out tomorrow, July 22nd through July 27th. Buy your tickets now. Uh, Forget about those two other movies that are massive right now. Just go see Bad Counselors. But
See,
anyways,
when I'm saying movies, I'm not going to the theater at all, but that we'll
yeah,
definitely talk about that. So let's talk about bad counselors. I mean, I
sure,
like to get the story because now I understand you. Now
yeah,
I understand reasons and depending
yeah.
on specific things. But now you probably being going back on set, you really were helpful to some people that never probably shot a big deal. I wonder, being on that set as a child actor and working so many major projects, did that help kind of be a leader in certain ways, even at a younger age on set?
You know, that's a really good question. I don't try to seek that at all. Like I
I'm
do
sure you
believe,
don't, but I'm sure you want to help.
but I do, yeah. So I think the best way to go about that is to be incredibly professional and kind and available, and then like Braden, who played shoot, I'm blanking on his name, but he's a this really cute 12-year-old kid, super fun, really talented. And him and his mom ended up asking me a lot of questions about when I was a 12-year-old actor. And I wasn't something that I was like, hey, if you I'm here if you need anything. Like that was something that I developed a rapport with him, and then
Yeah.
eventually they ended up asking me a question. So I think that's usually my goal on set is I just want to be the white blood cell to everything, where I'm just helping out wherever I can. And if it happens to be fellow actors, or even if I'm
Yeah.
talking to like crew members. That was something my dad taught me as a young age, is he did not care if I could cry on cue. He did not care that I hit my mark or that I knew every line. He cared that I knew the craft service guy's name as well as the director's name. Like
Oh, wow.
he would be on me like white on rice when it comes to stuff. Like if he
Really?
heard that other actors were like talking bad about people, he said, "I don't want you hanging out with those people at all."
What is your dad's
And
background? Is he in acting?
no, he was a playwright for a little bit, but then he realized that they didn't quite pay the bills, so he was an HR manager at a lumber company in Washington. That's what he did for like
There's
25
no,
years.
no that's a challenge in itself to be in the
Yes.
corporate end and represent and deal with so many different personalities on the HR
Yes.
side. Trust me, I'm sure that helped when
Yes.
his son was an actor.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
yeah, so let's talk about bad counselors. But I already can tell you're very humble. I know you went through kind of being away from it, but you're
Yeah.
very humble in where you're at. And you're saying, hey, I'm not just doing Christian stuff. I'm going to be doing a lot of other things too.
Mm.
Because anytime you can put in your resume something like that, that opens doors, doesn't it?
It does.
You're
It really does. And yeah, I think a lot of people are scared of being boxed in or typecast. If it inevitably happens, if you're typecast, that does also mean that you'll be getting work because everyone's gonna be seeking that. Hey, who's that one cringe Christian guy who does all those Christian movies? Like I use Kevin Sorbo, who I've filmed the movie with. I
uh,
love Kevin Sorbo.
Kevin's amazing. I've interviewed him, and I've
Yeah,
interviewed Braden Sorbo too. Oh my gosh,
both guys
but
awesome.
he's
I
a, he's a just a I
class
mean
act.
he's a class act. He was on a show with my co-host Dr. Gilda Carle, who wrote Real
Yes.
Men Don't Go Woke. You got to check out that book. That's a client of mine.
Yes. Yes. So, Kevin Sorbo, let's be honest, he's Mr. Christian movie guy.
Yeah,
And you know what? He's working all the time. And I think he's
he's not just
accepted
working in
that.
Christian stuff; he's working in other stuff too.
Exactly.
That's what you
100%.
can be doing the same thing. So
Yes.
that's somebody to really model yourself after, and his energy is
Yes.
unreal.
Yeah, he's a class act. He was always professional. Kevin Sorbo is the real deal.
Okay, all right. So talk about bad counselors now.
Yes, Bad Counselors is it might be I because I just was at the quasi premiere last night here in Texas and with some of the actors and the director, Chris Dowling. It is probably one of my most proud products that I've done because a lot of Christians, when they say they want to do like faith-based stuff, they usually shoot for the moon and then they end up somewhere in Albuquerque. They really don't exactly make where they wanted to go because inevitably the cheese and cringe of Christian content just kind of eventually just seeps in somehow. There is none of that. It's genuinely funny. All of the actors are really good in it, and the sprinkle of Jesus is there. But as I've been saying, that's the goal is to entertain the butts in the theaters, to entertain and to make them laugh. And I think this movie does that really, really well.
It sounds like it, and that's the thing. So, kind of telling me the story now. Tell me the premise of it really fast.
It's the greatest elevator pitch ever. Two frat guys who have no business being Christian camp counselors are forced to do community service, so they have to pose as Christians at this faith camp to get their community hours, or else they have to be expelled from their like Harvard type college.
Okay, okay. And who do you play?
I play the antagonist of the movie. I play the youth pastor who can sniff out that there's something funky about those guys, and I try to expose them for being frauds.
Interesting. But you think of yourself probably in those guys as well when you first stepped on a Christian campus.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, then I relate to them, but I also relate to my characters well because then after that, I went to every camp and I was a youth leader and I worked under a youth pastor, and so I acquired a lot of knowledge from both scenes, and I was able to kind of morph them together to form the character that I played in Bad Counselors.
I love it. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, you're bringing it to the table exactly the excitement of what you do and all that. So people could check out who all stars in it, Nathan, for people to know.
Oh man, we got the Matt Cornett, who's just in the hit Amazon show Every Year After. We got Ramon Reed, who is awesome. He's been in the industry for a while, but his his IMDb meter is gonna skyrocket after this because he's so funny in it. Breck Bassinger, who's I mean everyone knows her from the show she did on CW, Stargirl, I think it was what it's called, and then McKaylee Miller, also such a talent. She's been in a lot of Chris Dalling's projects, and I think she's in the movie called Mother, which is also really good. And then we have Chris Klein from American Pie. He's back. He's the youth. He's the pastor, the senior pastor at the church. Missy Pyle, who is hilarious in it as the cop. I'm sure I'm blanking on a name
That's okay. That's
somewhere.
okay. We're
Yeah.
going to stop you right there. All right. So my co-host asked all our celebrities this question.
Okay.
So Nathan, this is the deep one.
Okay.
What is the most important thing in life you ever learned?
The most important. I mean, I have just such an obvious answer, but I want to, I want to, I want to go deep here because I have two missions here on Earth. It's not to be a successful actor. It's not to make a certain amount of money or have a nice house or even, you know, have a huge family or have, a bunch of nonprofits. Those are great. The two most important things I'm supposed to do on Earth is to love God and love his kids. And that means everyone. And if I'm doing that and I can have that on my tombstone that I successfully did that, then I lived out the way that the Lord wanted me to live out, where I loved on him and I loved on his kids. And I mean that in every sense of the way where I'm not just like sharing the gospel every sense I can, but loving on them, knowing their needs, meeting their needs, learning people's names, learning their kids' names, being actually genuinely interested in their lives and showing true compassion and humanity. That's a part of the Great Commission. And if I can live that out and also love on him, then I'm doing it. That is the two most important things that I have learned, that I value the most. And a little side note, I'm a little asterisk. You can scroll all the way down. Not even a side note too. This is like a close second. Is I want to be the best husband and the best father I could be. I'm married. We are about 1 week away from being a year married, and marrying Hannah was the best decision I ever made. So I loving on her for the rest of my life too is probably the most important thing.
All right. I love it. That's great. Nathan, other projects coming up. Anything else to tell us about?
Yes, two big ones. One of them is a show called Bible College, which I co-created and I'm starring in. It's going to be a movie, then a show. So be looking out for that, as well as a movie I filmed a couple years ago called Miracle on the Precipice that is coming out in theaters next year. So look out for Bible College and Miracle on the Precipice.
And you have other projects you can't talk about. Well, appreciate it,
Exactly.
Nathan.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. Thanks again.
Have a
And
good
people
one.
could check out the movie easily by just going and searching
Go on
Bad Counselors.
Fandango, Cinemark, AMC, Regal. They're in most theaters right now, so please go and flood theaters with your friends. If they like a good comedy where they can laugh and cry, this is it.
All right. That was the special simulcast of the Neil Haley Show and the celebrity interviews live from the grotto. Take care, guys. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the special Tramelcast of the Neil Haley Show, the Storehouse Media Group podcasting Criminally Good with Sherry and Jen. Appreciate it, guys. And who's our guest today?
Jayson
Well,
Blair.
thank you,
Jayson
Jason.
Blair, yeah.
I had this big intro all set up for you. It's like, man, you were going to be the next thing coming. But actually, Jason is pretty interesting, guys, an author, podcaster, and life coach. And I'll let you finish the intro, Jason.
Oh, no. I mean, I think that's a
I'm joking.
relatively decent summary. My background originally actually is in journalism. That's what I did in the early part of my career. What I'm most known for is actually Scandal at the New York Times in the 2003, where I was responsible for fabricating and plagiarizing a number of stories. And that scandal, for all its upsides and its downsides, I just wrote a recent essay about it. One of the real, I mean, there were lots of downsides for the profession, lots of downsides for me, but one of the real upsides, I think, for me was the opportunity to sort of gain a little humility, but also grow. And I was, in the course of that, also diagnosed with, or at the end of it, diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which then led to my next chapter. After getting stabilized myself, I went into the mental health community first as a volunteer, But then ultimately as a clinician and a coach. And so that's where how I got to that space. And I've loved that business. I've loved that work. I do mental health work, leadership development work, but that's what also led to the podcast because some of my colleagues who were coaches had been suggesting for years because they knew one of my philosophies was that there should be no barrier to entry. So if a client came in and they could pay our normal rate, they would pay our normal rate. If you were a client and you couldn't afford it, let's say a young person who was, just out of high school and didn't go to college, or, we would charge you next to nothing. And then, people would have life circumstances like a divorce and we'd go down to zero. And my colleague said to me, you want no barriers to entry and you're always having these awesome, interesting conversations with people. Why don't you take them on the road and create a podcast, which gives everyone an opportunity for free to hear these interesting conversations? And of course, because I'm a numbskull, I said to her, that's crazy. That's crazy. That's a terrible idea. Let's not do that. Anyway, she made the point for several years, and ultimately that's what led to my podcast. And it's really rooted in that idea of finding really, really interesting people to have interesting conversations with. And where it sort of like lands in the true crime space, I really think, is that, you know, I don't really believe they're true crime stories. I believe they're human stories. And when you're telling stories, like we as human beings have one thing in common, I think. We have lots of things that are sort of like similar, but we all go through suffering. And that's something we all experience. And I think the stories that we hear when it comes to true crime, when we're talking to the victim's loved ones or someone who's searching for their missing relative, we're hearing a story about suffering that sometimes when we're watching it on Dateline or we are consuming it in, an online news magazine, it doesn't feel very relatable. But when you can have a long conversation with many of these folks, you'll find that their stories are very relatable and that you can learn lessons for your life. You know, I always like to think of Jill Harrington, who's Morgan Dana Harrington's mom. Morgan disappeared she was a student at Virginia Tech. She disappeared at the University of Virginia. She was attending a concert and, Jill said to me on the podcast, and I really thought and listening to her and her husband Dan come on, there's no way that I'm going to be able to relate to this. But she said, when you have a loss, when you're sitting there with a stack of ashes, what do you do? And well, if you take some ashes and you have water, you can build clay. And if you can build clay, you can build something. And that's how they've sort of approached this unfathomable loss of a child for so many of us. And we can take those lessons and whatever we're going through or suffering, we can apply them. So that's why so often my podcast touches on true crime, but it's really truly just about interesting people.
That's fantastic. I want to ask you, Jayson, and it's kind of a twofold question. Um, First, when did you know you had the gift for interviewing people?
I don't think I have the gift for interviewing people.
Okay. Well,
But people
He
tell me
hasn't figured
that.
it out yet.
Right. I haven't figured it out.
you,
No, I mean, I remember being on maybe it's a lesson I learned, but I forget. But I remember being on the podcast a couple years ago and I was on with Kimberly Loring, and this is a case that I've taken a lot of interest in. Ashley Loring, Heavy Runners case. She was a 20-year-old girl who disappeared in Montana on the Blackfeet Reservation. I was interviewing her sister, Kimberly, and we had finished recording. And, we were just talking a little bit afterwards. And she said, the one thing I want to tell you before I go is that God gave you a gift, and it was interviewing. You're really good at what you do. And I came back into the office the next day and I was like, this was such a great compliment. It's the first time I've heard that. And my assistant turned to me and she's like, well, that's like the 15th time I've heard you tell me that someone had said something along those lines. So, and maybe in that process of not always believing necessarily I'm good at interviewing, maybe that adds some intentionality to what I do, and maybe that helps with it. If that does that make, I mean, did I answer your question?
I think you answered my question, and it kind of leads to the part two of that I had. You've got the training now as a life coach and some background and work experience in that. So now I was wondering if that has how it may have influenced or maybe changed the way you approach an interview of survivors of crime and or the victims of folks who did not survive crime.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering how that hit for you.
Well, I think it's really interesting. I was talking to a coaching client recently, and when I'm meeting a new coaching client, I share a little bit about my background just so they know my perspective, the lens that I look at the world through. And I was saying I've been a journalist. I had worked, in mental health as a life coach and then done other forms of coaching and also interview people. And I remember when I was first going into clinical work, one of my colleagues saying to me, the hardest part is going to be to get people to open up to you and share, sort of like, and be vulnerable. And it was interesting because, in retrospect, as a journalist, I had a job where I had to get people to open up when they really had no interest in, rarely are they going to get anything out of it. And that made clinical work a lot easier. I also think having been through something that's very difficult, like by my own hand, and also plenty of other difficult moments, has really sort of, I think, softened my approach. And you mentioned to me that we really stuck to the outline that we did. In reality, I I really, if you look at the Ultimate Podcast episode, we did touch on everything that I outlined, but we went on so many trips in different directions because I really believe as an interviewer that if we completely follow my outline, it's me telling your story. It's those side parts of the conversation where your heart is pulling you that I just need to follow you on because my job as an interviewer is to really just help facilitate saying what you would say anyway. And so it's natural curiosity for me. You mentioned something um an aside about growing up somewhere in Virginia, I would spend all day on a farm in Virginia talking about that, even if the whole intention of the interview was to talk about law enforcement. Because if that's where your heart is pulling you, that is the most important thing. And so I take that same approach with victims' families. There might be something interesting about a case or an experience that I've read, but if I just let them go where their heart is, what the most important thing to them, we naturally get to the most powerful thing because it's not really about what I'm interested in, it's what they're interested in sharing. And I'm really just a vehicle to help them get to the point where they can do that.
Well, I think it's the passion too, is when you let them go where the heart is, that's where the passion is. And I always say that, that's what people connect to is that passion. It's contagious.
Hmm.
And so if you're talking and you go off on a something and you're very passionate about it, then your audience, it could be about basket weaving. I don't know. They're going to get into it because they're really into your passion and they're following you. I think you lead with passion.
Well, and we've all listened to interviews where the interviewer has like their list of questions, and it doesn't matter what the person says, they're going on to question number three. And it feels like, it almost feels like I just I describe it like I'm driving on the road and somebody just cut someone off as they're like daydreaming and looking at the mountains. You can feel that sort of disruption. Uh, and, one of the costs of that is my podcast can be pretty long. I'm never going to be the 45-minute tight conversation because, and I think part of the reason is because, any interview builds, you're actually building trust. Even if you know each other really well, you're building trust in the beginning. And that gives someone an opportunity to sort of be vulnerable. And self-disclosure, I'm very big on disclosing about every little foible about myself or interesting life lesson. Because if I'm willing to be vulnerable, that allows the other person to be vulnerable. I want my podcast to feel like you're overhearing a conversation that me and my guests are having in my living room or their living room.
Yeah. You have a podcast called Silver Linings Handbook. Tell us about that. I'm really interested in finding and hearing where you got the title. It's
Yeah,
an interesting title for a podcast.
well, it's a complete rip off of one of my favorite movies, which is it's kind of a funny story. So Silver Linings playbook itself. And I don't know if you guys remember that. That was Jennifer Lawrence and Bradley Cooper. And it was this wild story of basically for the two of them with their mental health issues, finding each other and finding sort of like a path, a plan, something that really worked for them. Quirky as it was, but it worked for them in terms of their quality of life. And I've always held on to that idea, I think my entire life, that you can find silver linings in anything, no matter how bad it is. Um, you know, every great lesson I've learned in my life has come through my suffering and through my pain. It's not to say I can't learn lessons in other ways, but the ones that really stick, come from eating that, as Khalil Gibran put it, that bitter poison, right? Of whether you're suffering or your pain. What did he say? He said pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. And physician, heal thyself by drinking from that bitter fruit. So I really believe, I really think that there are silver linings in everything. And what's the handbook? Well, it's the collection of all of our stories that other people can listen to and read that really provide roadmaps for other people. And I don't think I've ever had anyone ask me that question, that particular question. So it's really interesting to be able to share what the backstory on that is. And the second part of your question was just about the podcast in general. It wildly different guests. I mean, everyone from an FBI profiler to a prosecutor to victims' loved ones to a venture capitalist who's a coach to sex worker to you pick your category of person in the world, and I'm trying to talk to them, whoever they may be.
You know what I noticed, Jason, is because of me doing over 30,000 plus interviews or 40,000 plus interviews in 15 years. I see what you do. You enjoy it where you can know a little bit of background, but you want to learn about that person. You don't want to be told before the interview what's everything about that person. You want to really, and some of the questions you have prepared totally get thrown out the window once you see and get that follow up question. And you say to yourself, oh, okay, this is where I want to go. This
Yeah,
is this
like
is the you can't prepare for what could happen.
yep. Yep. And I think, I mean, the one caveat I'd throw on that is sure you can prepare, but the reason why you prepare is so you got a plan when all of that goes out the window. So it becomes less of a plan than just a bunch of tools you have around here.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's the follow up question. And a lot of people aren't good at that follow up question. They answer it and go to the next question. And you brought this up earlier. And I think it's such an important part of it is once you have that vibe going, that's why you do longer interviews. You don't know what to expect next.
Yep.
And you want to get as much out of an interview, interviewing that person than anybody else does because everyone's doing the podcast scene now. And you don't want to ask the same question over and over and over again. I think the challenge is when you have someone back again to make sure you go away from exactly what you talked about before, even if it was 7 years ago or 9 years ago, because you want to learn something next about that person.
Yeah. And recognizing that there's a tremendous amount of growth. People can look at the same events in their lives through completely different lenses at different points. And I've always thought that part of it, like when I have people come back on, it's so fascinating to see the areas where they've grown between interviews. And so I think it's also really important not to presume much about people. What's the data? They say what, 50 minutes is ideal for podcasts
The
ever?
reason they're longer and longer now is for
Hmm.
clips. That's
Yeah,
the
it's for
only
clips.
reason. It's the only reason because people have a short attention span. They can't,
Hmm.
and now more than ever, if you're a really good podcast clipper, you're going to have more opportunities to be seen and known. And a lot of people create podcasts not for the podcast, but for the clips.
Clip piece of it. Yep,
And
yep.
I mean, like some of these podcasts are valued at 30 million, 90 million. The one that OpenAI bought, the reason they bought it was because of the clips. It
Oh,
wasn't, it,
interesting.
it wasn't because of the podcast itself. Yes, the guests were kick butt, all those different things for OpenAI to buy it. But ultimately, it's the clips. There's another business podcast that's worth 30 or $40 million, and their downloads aren't that big. It's because of the clips are getting millions of views. So you have
Mm,
to be able to ask a question. And I was telling Jen and Sherry this that is going to lead to a conversation discussion. The problem is lots of social is pushed is controversy.
yeah,
So you got to make sure that you have two audiences involved in this, some that agree with you and some of you who disagree with you. And you never know what type of clip is going to get that information.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I have these moments when I'm doing an interview where, can we pause for a sec, just real quick?
Yeah.
Are you hearing that beep?
No, no, it's very low. Don't worry about it. Let's keep
Okay, so
going.
it's not
Just keep
messing
going.
up.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Great. So I don't want to screw up your clips.
No, you're not going to. You're not going to screw them up.
Good,
Keep
good,
going.
good.
Yeah.
Um, so I think one of the things for me when I'm sort of like thinking about the way that I do it, there are these moments, and even, in all my interviews, where I sort of say that's the money quote. And there are a couple things that I've noticed that are in common. It's when the subject of the interview starts to pause and really has to process, and I know they're thinking and they're now off their script and they've kind of been stumped by something. What almost always comes out of that is some of the most powerful stuff that they're processing in the moment, the new revelation or the new idea. So I actually, in my podcast, my editor doesn't cut out the pauses, the ums, we might cut out something crazy we say, or
Mhm.
the dog barking in the background, or whatever it is, because I really do think those human moments, like a pause sometimes says something even more powerful about someone's emotions than the words that they actually use.
Agree. All right. Go ahead, guys.
Well, Jason, another thing you've done is you've written a book.
I
You're an
did. I
author.
got a funny story about that one.
Well, I think that the title's interesting, Burning Down My Master's House, but you
I
tell us
can,
about it, but I'm kind of eager to hear your funny story first.
yeah, so okay, so what the book is about, it's about my time at the New York Times. And one piece of advice that I give everyone, I'm like, when you go through a big scandal, because some of these big scandal people I'll talk to, I'm like, wait about like 7 years, because that's about when you're going to have your first revelation about it, like your first real big understanding. So it takes time to understand, and to grow, particularly when you've been through something that feels traumatic for you, right? And so I wrote my book like 1 year after the events had happened. So probably a decade before I should have been putting a pen to paper. So the funny story I tell, so the book went out of print at some point along the way, I think, or at least the hardcover book went out of print. And I was going to go talk to a Duke class. I think this was in 2016, 2015. Public policy professor had asked me to talk to a bunch of journalism students who were in graduate school. And I went in, and then, he asked me, "Hey, next time, can you bring a signed copy of your book?" So I come back the next year with a signed copy of the book. And the inscription is, "Bill, please do not read this. Signed, Jason."
Wow.
Because what I know, I think about, and what I've learned and what I've grown from when it comes to my experience, very little of that did I have it in the first window. But I am a writer. I have a Substack. I edit a true crime Substack, which reminds me, I was going to ask whether you want to write something for us. Um, But I edit a true crime Substack called the True Crime Times with Brett and Alice from the prosecutors. I also have my own Substack that's called The Center Holds, and the whole idea behind that is, we're in such a time of division and turmoil. How do we find a center among us? I'm, a big fan of that idea and that concept, and I'm also writing a book myself. And it's so writing is always a part of my life. I think it's the oldest form of therapy. And it's just so valuable to me to not only be able to do that therapeutic thing for myself, but also to be able to help people too with the writing. So I'm writing about a particular case that I've been following for a while, but it's also a cultural critique about our culture, about society, about how things happen the way they do. And so I love that work. It's deeply meaningful to me. I was talking to a publisher today about it, and he was making the point that like, well, advances are not what they used to be. And I'm like, I don't really care because why I'm doing this is for the people who can benefit from it, who can learn from it, the family that's dealt with this, the other families that if we figure out how to solve some of these societal problems, won't have to suffer for it. So this is a project of love, not a project of money. And I feel like that's true about a lot of the work that I do. It's always been centered on some kind of mission, and as I get older, the mission becomes way more important than anything else.
I like that. That's really good. That goes back to what you're kind of known for in your podcast is the empathy, which I think comes from life experience one and two, probably your upbringing, and then three, the training that you've gotten is to being a life coach. Because I don't think without some empathy you could be a life coach.
You wouldn't be good at it,
No,
and
not really. Yeah,
you also wouldn't enjoy it, probably.
but
I mean,
I think that too goes back to a lot of times true crime kind of gets the criticism for exploiting somebody's tragedy, and I believe that it depends on how it's presented as to how
yeah.
it's presented there, and so I can see that in your focus with your podcast that you focus on the survivor or the victim of
Yes. Yeah,
lost
yeah.
someone.
And I also, I care about, for example, the investigators, but
Right,
what I think I care more about is them as humans who
right.
made a choice, who are human beings, and we get so used to not thinking of them as humans, right? Because they're in this character of this mold. So I do care about all of those people who are behind it. I don't want to drive past the part about upbringing, but you're absolutely right. My mother and father, they were great. They moored in us wonderful values. They gave us opportunities to go out and make all of our mistakes and all that fun stuff. But I do think it's really, I think shaped my approach. But we met at CrimeCon. A lot
Yeah.
of people have a hard time with CrimeCon because they view some of it as exploitive and problematic in other ways. And I'm not saying it's perfect from my perspective, but there's a spectrum. But what I find is the vast majority of people at CrimeCon really care about the cases. They really care about people. They're deeply invested in helping survivors and other things along those lines. Now, I do get their problematic elements, but I have this friend, Raul Montero, if you ever heard of Catch Lisk. He's one of the people who has just been most aggressive on getting justice for the girls at Gilgo Beach and for other girls who have gone missing and men who have gone missing, girls, women, and men and boys who have gone missing in that Long Island area. And he's built this amazing database. It's got 35,000 entries of
Wow.
missing or unidentified people. Highly recommend it. Catch List Matt. Law enforcement has used it. He doesn't talk about this much, but it's been used to actually solve some cases. It's been successful in solving some cases and looking for patterns. And but Raul, when we first met, he said to me that, and I interviewed him for the podcast, but he said to me that true crime is a gateway for sensationalism and for monetization. And I said, Raul, actually, true crime is the gateway drug for helping. You know, when I meet people who come into true crime for whatever reason, right? They could be coming into it for whatever reason, their own personal experience with crime, their own anxiety about the world, wanting to be able to help. Well, what I find is so many of those people then become the warriors, supporting these families, trying to educate people, doing all these good things in the world. And so I think we can look at the negative of true crime, which, like I have a Substack where we do that often. But I think there is so much more good in my experience that comes out of it. I can't tell you the number of people I've seen come in as true crime creators, no law enforcement experience, who are going and doing investigative genetic genealogy now, or they've joined a DA's office, or they've done something, they've advocated, or they've sent a $5 gift card to a family that's looking for their lost family member. Like, that stuff matters. And I really do think true crime opens the door to a lot of that.
Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking that.
Right.
And I agree, and I do know that people who are survivors, and especially somebody who's been killed, they really want to keep. They don't want anybody to forget.
Yep.
You know, and I think true crime keeps these people, and they turn them into names into people because they'll put
Yeah.
faces with them, and so people can actually see what this person looked like and everything. So I think, when it comes to something like that, the family members are just so happy and glad that somebody's paying attention and they haven't forgot their loved
I think it's a great point because I really believe that your first death comes when you die, and the second death comes when you've been forgotten. And I really believe that for a lot of these families, and also for me as a podcaster and an interviewer, I don't want them to be forgotten. I don't want that second death. So many of them suffered in the first one in some way, or there was some kind of injustice related to the first one, but we can keep them alive.
one. Yeah.
Very much. I'm very, very big on the never forgot. That's actually the 37th chapter in my book. That's
Yep.
the final chapter. The never forget, the never
Yep.
forgotten. So
Yeah. Yeah, I used to work with murder victims, and I just remember how they would come up to me and say, "Thank you for not letting my daughter go forgotten."
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, and the emotions that I would get from them, and knowing people in that situation, just let's keep remembering them because they
Yeah.
they lost them unexpectedly, and they're still heartbroken
It's
as
funny
they hear.
too, like thinking about people who are investigators or lawyers or other folks. I think sometimes don't even realize that just being on the other side and spending a lot more time with, you know, just like we struggle to look at law enforcement as people sometimes, I think sometimes if law enforcement knew how much it warmed the heart of a victim's family member that they just spent 10 minutes that day thinking about their loved one, I mean, it is huge. It is really huge and it's meaningful. And I think almost, I don't want to say, it's different for different people. But I do think resolution is very important for people, but knowing that people care is like the next best thing in between and sometimes even more important.
I have to agree, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So where can people find your book?
Um, Hopefully only in a trash bin. If we're talking about the old book. Check your local shredder. I mean, that book's available on Amazon, available other places. I don't know how long it's going to take me for the new book. I'm 3 years in, and it might be 3 more years. So, um, but the podcast certainly is available. Silverliningshandbook.com is the spot for that. On Substack, the True Crime Times, too, if you have any listeners who like to write, we're really big on having guest essays in addition to the people who regularly write from us. And we've had everybody from victims' family members to prosecutors to defense attorneys to investigators write for it, advocates. So that's another one. And then my other Substack, The Center Holds, it's more analytical and out there and whatever wacky idea is on my head. But any of those places are great places. And certainly if anybody has suggestions about guests that they would like to hear from, I'm not afraid to reach out to anyone in the world to have a conversation if they're willing to have a real conversation.
I got an idea for you, but I'm gonna give it to you afterwards.
Let me know.
I'll email it to you.
Perfect.
Awesome. And where can people find you to reach out to you?
Yeah. Oh, it's Silver Linings Handbook Pod at gmail.com. Also, if you ping me on social media, you can find me that way. Might take me a little bit longer. The email is the fastest way. But, I try to check all the secret hidden message boxes every now and then.
Awesome.
There you go.
All right. All right. Thanks again. And go to storehousemediagroup.com for all things publishing, ghostwriting, and media. And lastly, go to jenniferclarkesq.com to purchase her book. Appreciate it, guys. That was the special Travelcast, the Neil Haley Show, the Storehouse Media Group podcast, and Criminally Good with Jen and Sherry. Take care. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the special simulcast, the Neil Haley Show, and the GildaGram podcast with our host, Dr. Gilda Carle. Hi, Dr. Gilda.
Hi, Neil. You know how we are so attached to our screens. I love mine. Everybody loves theirs. You love yours. And I am so involved in social media. I really have made this a priority in my life because I want to keep posting and having fun. And this is a wonderful way for me to be spending my time. I can talk to people I've never met. There are some crazies who said, one woman came to me and said, "Where did you get this from? I know this person. You shouldn't have." And I said, "I just got this from the internet." And she said, "Well, you shouldn't be posting this about him." I said, "I don't know him. I thought it was a good story." "Well, I'm complaining to LinkedIn." I said, "See ya, bye." And then I blocked her. What is she complaining about? First, I couldn't even understand what she was talking about. She said, "Where'd you get that story?" And we posed how many stories? Many, many stories. I said, "What story?" She didn't even know how to find the story. Anyways, there are some crazies out there who have nothing better to do with their time than annoy people. So, what do you guys do? You guys who are watching us now, what do you guys do? Do you ignore them? Do you write back to them? Do you give them the same kind of nasty statements back that they give you? Or do you block them? I don't know. I want to hear what other people are doing because there's no rhyme or reason for nastiness. So this is what I just found. This is fascinating to me. 6 countries just admitted something went wrong in their classrooms. Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, France, and Italy are quietly pulling tablets from schools and bringing back printed textbooks and pens and pencils and paper. What do you think of that, gang? What do you think? Everything old is new again. This is really incredible. Officials say children's reading levels, memory, and concentration dropped after years of heavy screen use. Sweden's schools minister said flatly that students simply need more textbooks. Denmark banned phones during lessons and is spending hundreds of millions of kroner on physical books instead. Norway even blocked AI